Hello, everybody. It's Heather, the Leadership the Heart podcast. And today I am thrilled to have Laura Chevalier on here with me. She wants me to say the American way, but I can't. I can't do it. I love her last name. But I have her on here. She was referred to me by somebody in the Thinkers 50 list with me. And after I listened to some, learned some of her background, we spoke in advance about a month ago to kind of just understand a little bit more about each other. And so I was excited just to have her on as a leader, a really different angle, I think, that we'll be taking. So welcome, Laura.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell everybody right now, where are you on your leadership journey?
Yeah. So I have spent more than the last 10 years actually in an IT consulting startup. And so it was a big leap of faith for me. And I have had multiple of these kind of leaps in my life where I had started in teaching and then went to sports and then went to corporate America and then got an opportunity where some executives I had worked with before, kind of in that large corporate enterprise environment, had went and built a startup and asked me to join. And so I've been with this organization for over a decade, and I think it's an interesting bookend from where my career started to like this endeavor because I've been able to wear a multitude of hats. I think it's sometimes interesting that if you're a dynamic personality and you are an avid learner and you are fascinated just about business and evolution, I think opportunities to build subject matter expertise in different areas is very appealing to individuals like me. And so I have been able to wear a multitude of hats, learn up a lot. And in essence, in my role today, I'm now the Chief Growth Officer for Provalis, our division that goes into rural America and builds delivery centers and basically upskills and employs smart, bright, hardworking rural Americans, along with military veterans and their family members. So it's the perfect blend of business and personal passion and serving and all of these things to have an incredible impact. So it really is a blessing to have so many different things come together to bring me to this point in my career and my life. Mhm.
I love that. I am curious. One of the things you said that always is intriguing to me are the people who are always like they're kind of grabbed or like yanked up and put into positions in different areas. Like basically the people who never have to apply for a job because someone's always there to be like, you come here, and you just are there to kind of seize the opportunity. I'm curious to know it seems like you're that kind of person. Where does that come from? Like where
Absolutely.
does that desire to be like I'm learning, but then where does it stem from something like way back? Curious.
It's interesting. I think obviously some of it is a humility. It's being willing to fail, right? And being willing to raise your hand and say, I'm going to try something and I don't know if I'm going to be good at this. You think I might be good at this, but I'm willing to give it a shot. So there's part of that you need to be willing to be broken and challenged and unsuccessful and stumble your way into kind of the right path. And so absolutely, I think I've always had this mindset like of carpe diem, let's see what I can do. I think the other mindset for me is faith, right? I have a blind faith that if I feel like a door is opened, you're given an opportunity to take a chance and step through it or not. And so I've definitely leaned in on things where others might have said you're absolutely crazy, but for me, I just felt pulled in that direction or called in that direction, whatever it may be. A really good example is when I joined this company. I met with our two co-founders and they had said, "Hey, join the organization." When we first talked about this, I was pregnant. And so I ended up joining 6 months later. And so how crazy is it when you think about it that I joined a startup with a 6 month old and an 18-month-old as a full-time working mom and thought, okay, we're gonna take a chance. And why did I do that? I loved the mission of giving back. And it was, a very integrated foundation of, hey, we're gonna put people to work, but we're also gonna give back at the same time. And we're gonna do these volunteer programs and backpack buddy programs and all of those things. And it just spoke to me. And I thought, wow, I'm excited about this. Let's see. So I think those two dynamics really come together when you're willing to take kind of big leaps.
And that's interesting. One of the we talked about a little bit before we started was me personally. I've been kind of called to reposition some of my
Yeah.
messaging and just kind of a little bit of the direction. But one of those things is self-leadership, really leaning
Mhm.
more into how we lead ourselves more effectively and really what the components are. Of course, the book came from that. And then this focus on unshakable leadership, which is just basically the idea of, making sure that our foundation is strong, so
Mhm.
that we can withstand the storms that are coming at us. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we go away from the basics when things go a little nutty. And I'm
Mhm.
just reinforcing for people that they need to go back to the things they can control most and go back to the basics,
Yeah.
go back to the foundation of what makes you more, more strong. So one of the things I think about is this idea of like self-advocacy,
Mhm.
and also like having that growth mindset, because oftentimes we do get stuck in our own way. We get stuck in the muck. I don't know if you have an example or a time where somebody like you, like people are like, wow, how can I be like that person? She's amazing. Is there ever a time when you were a little stuck?
Oh, absolutely.
And
I
what'd you
try
do? What'd you
all
do?
the
What'd you do
time
to
that
come
I'm
out of
like,
it?
there's a multitude of times. I'm like, there's some stuff that's like simple stuff, just like, oh, I need to get healthier, or I need to start working out again, or I need to go to bed at a reasonable hour. So some of it, I think, are the real tactical things that sometimes we overlook how much that pulls into the rest of our lives. And then some of it is, for me, my biggest challenge is I very much get stuck in the tactical weeds. And so I want to be there for everybody at all times. I want to make sure that no balls are dropped. And so my toughest time is when, and I could give 100 of these examples, where I get really stuck kind of in the minutiae of things. And I have to take like a deep breath to step back and say, okay, what is a real priority? Where am I bringing value? Where can I help support the company or the team, or what I'm doing in my personal endeavor? I think the biggest challenge that is interesting for me is letting other people down. That is the number one thing, is that I'm not
Mm,
staying awake at night thinking I didn't work hard enough or I didn't try as hard as I could. But if you do everything right and things still don't come together, that
mm,
is where I really struggle. And whether that is stress or anxiety or pressure or soft depression because you're just frustrated that like, why didn't this work? That to me is the hardest part, because I'm a people person. And so I want everyone around me to be successful. We want people to succeed in life. And so I think that's for me where I get stuck, right? Because
mm.
you get stuck fixating on what could I have done differently, or how could I have changed
Yep.
this, or what could I, and anytime you're, I think, fixated on that retrospective versus like, okay, I'm going to dissect it, I'm going to change it, and I'm going to move on, is when
Yep.
I think you kind of get stuck on that hamster wheel of you're not moving forward anymore. Hmm.
Absolutely. One of the things I used to do I would do much heavier for other people, which is I'd give a lot of people grace in a
Yep.
moment. So they'd make a mistake and I'd be like, no, like seriously, don't worry about it. And I would do that a lot, but I
Hmm.
wasn't doing it for myself.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
was a bit of a perfectionist. And I got to a point and I'm like, I'm going to start to do more reflection to figure out exactly when this changed for me. Well, so
Hmm.
now that I still give people grace, of course, but I start leaning more into how am I giving my own self grace? Not too much grace. I would say like not too much, because grace also is like grace is like saying permission to not be perfect, to
Yeah.
make a mistake, and to kind of, what's not okay is that you make mistakes and don't learn from it.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that the grace gives us that time to learn from it, and then like go do something different. And so I'm being a lot better at that. I'm just trying to think like about when that started for me, where I was like, you know what, like it's time to do the same for me. It's time for me to, so that self-leadership, as the evolution has happened for me, where
Yeah.
I've led myself much more consistently, where I feel stronger as it relates to that. I feel more inside my own skin. It was just there was definitely an awakening that took place where I was like,
Well, for me,
this is not what
you're
I
you're
like.
spot on. I also think there's iterative tracks you have of what your experience looks like in your 20s versus your 30s versus your 40s, and then you like intertwine in that family and kids and different seasons of life. I think where I've been more accommodating is being able to acknowledge, okay, in this season of life, here are my priorities. Here I'm gonna accommodate certain things and not. I think some of it also is just letting people and things go, right? So
Hmm.
there's times where you're saying, I'm really trying to make A, B, and C work in my life, and it's just not. So, guess what? I'm not going to be a Pilates person because I cannot get there consistently. It's not going to happen. But you know what? I can run and I could be on it,
Yes.
right? And that's like a casual example, but there are deeper things and
Hmm.
bigger relationships in life that I think sometimes we really try and bring things in and it's not fitting because of whatever season you're in life, and being able to accept and
Yes.
say, hey, in 4 years, my kids are gone. Maybe something different will happen, or an opportunity will open up for this relationship or mentorship or job opportunity, whatever it may
Yep.
be. That is the other piece, is just acknowledging that there's so many iterative changes that you make in life. I think there's too often that we think we need to graduate college, decide who
Mm.
we'll be and what we're going to do and who we're going to marry and how many kids we want and where we want to live. And the reality of the situation is we are blessed to live in a time period in life where all of that could change quite frankly, tomorrow, right? If you want to pick up
Yep.
and move tomorrow, you really could do it. And I think we're afforded a different dynamic of flexibility in our generation than in generations prior, for sure.
And that's a really different, I love the way you say we're blessed to have that because that's a really different way. That's a great reframe.
Yeah.
And that's just a different way of like the way the world is like all nervous about tech and AI and all these things. And I know you're obviously have the technology startup. So for you, it's embedded in there. It's the way of living,
Yeah.
right? For the average of us, we definitely don't necessarily have it. But I like the reframe of wow, this is kind of exciting. It's an exciting time. And like ignore the news and all the bleakness and the craziness. Oh my gosh. And just to
Yeah.
kind of go inward. I was thinking about this. Somebody did a post the other day and and it was basically like the winners, the losers are those who, basically, become depressed and don't do anything and sit down when failures happen. The winners are the ones who go to, and I thought to myself, it kind of goes back to this grace idea, but what it really means is it's the nuances that exist. There are
Yeah.
so many nuances right now that we're rapidly taking in our environment and we're living in the nuances and how intentional we are about how we ebb and flow inside of that is critical. So I think like the part if I'm thinking about loser winner, which I hate that
Yeah.
whole dichotomy, I hate it so much. But if I'm thinking about it, is that it's just the person that doesn't allow themselves to live in the nuance, doesn't ebb and flow, doesn't allow the emotions, the human emotions to be present and then
Hmm.
go, okay, what's the alternative path? And
Yeah.
just be thinking that through, but like in a very human way where it's messy and it includes other people and we talk it through and we have to, it's just that
Yeah,
part of
it's
who we are.
really funny. And I very much, and parenting changes your perspective for sure, because it gives you a minute to step back and say, okay, I remember that moment where I felt I was as sad as I could possibly be. And then
Mhm.
5 years later, you have experience and you're like, that was nothing, right? This is so much worse than that experience, or this is so much better than that experience. So
Yes,
I think one perspective gives you a lot as you kind of build that knowledge and experience and subject matter experience and all of that. But also, you couldn't experience that glorious win of where you're like, oh my God, I'm riding that high without fighting to get there. I've
totally.
told my kids anything worth it, you're going to have to work for because if it was
Mhm.
easy, not only would everyone have it, but it wouldn't feel as important, as impactful if you didn't have to fight to get there. And so I think some of it is understanding that all of this ultimately is something that's been instilled in us. I mean, we're as human beings, these remarkable creatures that get to feel this like wide spectrum of emotions, and it's been created for a reason, and it's there for a reason, and it allows us to drive and motivate us and all of these things. And if you didn't have both spectrums, it just wouldn't work, right? So
Exactly.
that's part of it for sure. I think, I tell people all the time in work and in personal life, you're going to take hits. It is what it is. You can't be perfect, right? We're all going to fail.
Hmm.
I think the dynamic is being able to say to your point of how can I learn for this? How can I be better for this? How can I do this differently? And what will I do the next time I face this crossroad, right? That's for sure. I think the people that feel like they're winning all the time, even though they might not be, even though they could all tell you, here's all the things I had to do to get to this winning moment, and it wasn't fun along the way. But from the outside perspective looking in, they're seeing it as, hey, that person is always successful or they're always doing well in life, you know?
So, so true.
Mhm.
So I am curious as we think about, you know, the idea of unshakable leadership includes both self-leadership and caring leadership. So leadership with heart is there. What's your definition of leadership with heart? When you think of leadership with heart, what does that mean to you?
So it's interesting. I think I grew up in the era where servant-minded leadership, I mean, you can talk about Leaders Eat Last, you can talk about all the books out there about servant-minded leadership. And I think where this has maybe evolved to being caring and empathetic is being able to really give constructive and critical feedback, having critical conversations, being able to know and engage and build relationships with your teammates and with the folks that are working with you and for you, knowing them well enough to be able to have very direct, clear feedback, clear expectations, and challenging them accordingly. It's interesting that I think if you asked my team or anyone that's worked with me, their feedback is Laura will find a silver lining in almost anything, even if she's giving you the worst feedback possible, right? And she will tell you, here's how we are going to navigate through it this, or here's how I can help you navigate through this, or here's what, the next steps will be to get us, on a positive way. And I, for predominance of my work, run a sales team. So when you think about it, you can't ride more of a roller coaster emotionally than a sales team. And so how do you kind of build that confidence over time and ensure that people feel continually successful? But I think this has evolved where I think there was a dynamic before where you constantly had to only lift people up and be there to serve and be there to support them. And it's evolved a little bit to say, no, if you're really going to be a strong leader, you have to find that balance of challenging people and pushing them and seeing what they're really capable of. And sometimes that's going to be uncomfortable, but you can't get them to their best self unless you're willing to put them in some uncomfortable and challenging situations.
Yeah, you have to. I think that the feedback portion of it is so critical because for both us and them, there are just so many blind spots that we present ourselves with people that are presented to us. We just
Yeah.
aren't seeing things. And if we can help them from a place of care and concern, it helps them be stronger because the better the more they're able to see that and they're able to work on that, it just helps them polish the edges. I always say, like, oh, there's so much greatness in us. The feedback just helps us polish the edges. It's all it does. It doesn't make us somebody who we're not. It makes us the best version of who we are. And I think it is our role as leaders, either leaders of ourselves, leaders of people, to be constantly polishing, right?
Well, and I think transparency and time are the two biggest challenges. One, so many one-on-ones happen behind closed doors. So it's you with somebody on your team. And what we started to do is all of our one-on-ones and when we do our big planning sessions, it is as a group. So we will work together with somebody's one-on-one plan for what are my team goals, what are my individual goals, what are my personal goals. And they will actually go through that whole exercise with our entire team so that our entire team can see what are they trying to accomplish, what are their goals, what are their objectives. And we're all kind of helping that individual. And sometimes those sessions are 20 minutes and sometimes they're an hour, depending on what that person needs to
Mm,
talk about. But we all have line of sight and there's full transparency in terms of what that individual is going to be working on for the next quarter, 6 months. But it's really allocating the time. And so, yeah, we do it at start of year. We've been doing it, quarterly of saying, hey, we're going to block some time to spend an hour or a couple hours to say what is everyone, doing and how they're tracking against their performance. I find that is a very valuable piece because I think sometimes leaders feel like it has to fall on me, but there may be something that you need help in growing that I can't give you, but maybe someone else on the team can.
mhm,
And that's kind of the piece where we've definitely got into this shared growth mindset, which I think has changed the capability of what our team is going to accomplish, not just this year, but in the coming years, because everybody's collectively invested in each other in a
mm.
different way.
I love that partnering idea, and I'm going to be honest. I'm the only child, and I've done a lot of bootstrapping. I pull myself up. I pull
Yep.
myself up through different adversity and things, right? And it took me a while to get to the point where I was like, you know what, maybe I'll join this bigger association. Like I'll join this bigger group to kind of have a supportive kind of place, or I'll let more people into the circle, or I'll hire more coaches because I know, like, recognizing again the blind spots is there, my limitations all by myself when I don't include more people. And so I always notice that I'm more hesitant to do like, let me join this big group who's going to analyze all my information. I tend to be more one-on-one, so I'll hire a
Yeah.
private coach. I hire multiple private coaches, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Versus because there are like for speakers, there are
Yeah.
these are groups, the groups that are aside from the speakers association, there are these other groups where you go and they'll be like they literally are like, and here's how you, and they just break everything down and like they're trying to make you better. But my mind is like, I don't know if I can take it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally.
Like,
It's
I'd rather
funny.
take it from one on one. I'd rather have my like a coach who's like and like do it versus being like a whole group. I'm not sure. I'm not sure this is going to be that's this horrible to say, but I'm not sure my pride could take it.
Well, I was going to say, let me add the caveat that a little bit of the difference is that we are already like an Italian family, meaning we already work together. So we
Good
already
point.
know each other's kids, spouses, habits, neuroses, what have you. So we're like the curtain's already been pulled back. So my mindset is we're already in a team. We already talk every day. We already work together every day. We already go to conferences together. Yes, we've had new people kind of come into the team, and you can see a little bit of their sensitivity when we first kind of do this. And then when they get to their
Mhm,
second exercise and third exercise, like, it gets more comfortable. But yes, that's
mhm,
probably harder because you're getting peripheral feedback. And this,
mhm,
what we're kind of really doing is just opening the gates to say, we already work together, but now
Mm,
it's not only going to come from Laura, it's going to come from my peer group and people that report up to me. And we're going to think tank different exercises. So
yes.
one of the things, as an example, we did is everyone wrote what they thought their goals were for, individual, team, and personal life, right? They wrote them in a color, and then we kind of debated with them. Is that really an easy target? Is that a good target? How are you going to accomplish it? And then in a different color, they had to put
Mm,
some subsets of what was going to help them accomplish that goal or how we were going to support or challenge them in accomplishing that goal, as well as poking holes in it to say, is that really a high enough target? Maybe you could do more. That's where I think the exercise is interesting if you can do it with people you know. You would have to do it
mm,
with your family. You would have to do it with your husband and kids and say, okay, here are some things I'm going to challenge myself on this year. Here are some things that I want to get better on. You would almost have to do it in your environment with people that know you
yeah.
authentically, genuinely well.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
very good point. And luckily I have an agency that manages me on the speaking side, and they have since 2020. So they have kind of seen the growth of the
There
iterations
you
and that.
go.
And I have the person is the owner. She's so good about it. She just like, she gives it to you how it is. Like in her
Yeah.
mind, she's like, a no and yes and no and yes. And you're like, okay, I'm not taking this personally. Because then you learn that
Yeah.
it's just like, this is the way you do it. This is the way you take it
Yeah.
in. This is what you do. You change. And so I do think that the feedback is kind of a gold nugget. It's at the core of self leadership, giving, how we give and receive it. One of the things I'm trying to get better at, and I've had a couple really good friends to me say, because listening is kind of the foundation of all the work I do, and listening means like listening at the feedback that's given to me. It means listening to nonverbal, like so meaning like listening with my heart, my gut, everything, right? The whole entire
Yeah.
sensory experience of listening. And so sometimes what will happen is I'll give feedback and or feedback will be given to me, sorry, and then I'll take it in like too much. And this a couple friends were like, "Hey, do you really need to take that feedback in? Like, I'm not sure. Should you actually take that feedback in? Should you trust it? I feel like you depend on you take the feedback in too much." And so, what do you think is that, how has that been for you where you've received feedback? How have you determined for yourself when to take certain feedback, when not to take certain feedback? What are those circumstances for you?
So it's interesting timing because we literally just did our 360s 2 months ago. And we do these every couple of years. And I had said to the mentor that I was assigned, I said, it's funny because I think about, and I still have mine. I still have mine that it was done at 25 and 30 and, these iterative phases. And for the first time in any of these sessions, when we started off the session, I had already seen the packet and feedback. I said to her, listen, for every feedback point, for literally 20 years, these three things have come up, right? I'm not going to talk slower. I'm not going to think slower. And I don't know that I can dial back my passion at all. So let's just skip those and focus on the things that I can actually probably still grow, evolve, and change in. Because what I'm realizing is some of these are so core to my biggest strengths and weaknesses, right? If I'm going to be in sales, I need to think fast. If I'm going to be customer facing, I need to be positive and high energy, right? There's certain things that you'll find that sometimes are the biggest critiques people will give you are also why you're very successful in certain facets. And so I've kind of come to the conclusion a lot of your biggest strengths are instinct and a lot of your biggest weaknesses are instinct. So I always focus on what is in the middle. What can you still mold, influence, change, and evolve? And so what I kind of challenged her to say was, okay, if we take out the extremes, what is in the bulk of the center that we can really focus the time, effort, and energy on still changing? Because I think what happens is we get fixated on the couple of things that are probably so visceral to who we are that they're almost difficult to change and they eat away at us, right? One example is I was born and raised in Detroit, first in my family to go to college. I am never going to speak eloquently like a scholar, so to speak. I'm not going to have that tone. I'm always going to have high energy and a high pitched tone, and my passion is going to come through, and my nomenclature will reflect my experience. And so I find your positive and negatives always have this push pull tether. And if
Yes.
somehow we're corrected and I somehow was, calmer and talked slower and did all of these things, would people be as drawn to my energy and passion and trustworthiness? Maybe not. So that is always my feedback. The middle
Mm,
areas is really what typically elevate your success or capabilities in life, whatever they are, because the extremes are so innate to your personality. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to.
mm. Oh, that's so interesting. One of the things I've been noticing, okay, let me just say, everybody who has been listening already knows this, so this is not like some secret. So I have a lot of energy. I speak fast, eat fast, talk fast, walk fast. Everything I do is fast. And one of the piece of feedback that person I told you gives good feedback meaning like it's critical and it is what it is, and there's not a lot of fluff to it. She would say to me, if you just slow down,
Hmm.
your level of power would really go up. And so I have in this last year or so really been super focusing on it, like in my life generally, but
Yeah.
on stage specifically too, because I noticed that if I don't, I'm people are like skipping over or missing like very critical things, and
Yeah.
so I'll just be, and you don't even know how hard it is for some. Yeah, well, you do because you have
Oh,
a lot of
I
energy,
know.
right?
I
So it's
know.
like
Yeah.
you and I are like powwow,
Yeah.
and we're like, oh, we're totally getting each other, and we're like, we totally are like grabbing everything that we're pulling, throwing out, right? But not everybody can operate at that level. Doesn't mean like we're at a higher level, a better level. It's just that we just operate at a different level. I don't know. It's just different frequency, right?
Yeah.
So I'm on there. And one thing I realize is kind of what you're saying, which is you can't like sit around trying to be a cheaper version of someone else or some other like a knockoff. And
Yeah.
people are going to sniff it out. They're going to know it. I do have a law degree I presented in court, but it was always the trustworthiness because people did in me. I'd come to them. I would come to them in my presence, right? And I would always try to meet them where they're at. And I just started to realize, like, boy, this is my thing. And I need to
Hmm.
do more of a my thing. But then what you said too, which is there's this part of me that says do your thing, which is the unedited, very real. Yes, I'm educated. I can do that. I can play that, but I ain't playing that because this is who I am. But
Yeah.
there is a place where they, at least from my perspective, people are hiring me for my expertise. So I'm
Hmm.
going to be real, and at the same time, I'm going to hold the strength of my expertise there because
Yeah.
I can't like give it completely away. But the
Yeah.
realness is wholly me. So I get to demonstrate the expertise inside of the realness. It's just the way
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. For
But it's
sure.
just understanding that balance, like not being so extreme on both sides, or not
Correct.
saying it has to be this or that, but that you
Mhm.
can kind of operate in multiple spaces. That's why we're human. I feel like there's like
Yeah.
this thing that makes us complicated. If we just are simple with one way or another, who
And
are
it's
we?
really rounding out, you said it exactly right. It's really rounding out the edges, right? You're not going to
Hmm.
totally transition or change some of your core habits and your core strengths and your building blocks that make you who you are. But you can soften the edges, right? You can round them out a little bit. You can be conscientious of the nuances of the audience. So there's definitely times where I'm explaining for the longest time, I don't think my family knew what I did. I swear to you, like for the first every year at Christmas, it'd be like, so what do you do again? And I realized, okay, I need to slow down. I need to explain this differently. And I need to have them reiterate it and tell it back to me so that I know that they know what I actually do, right? So there's definitely times where I think I've gotten more conscientious of an audience. And listen, your kids are great sounding boards for this because anytime I want to
Oh, yeah.
practice something or need to rehearse something or what have you, they're great people to say, okay, I'm going to explain this to you and you give me your unedited feedback, right? But you're
Yes.
right. I think the difference maybe in the maturation is I think in your 20s you look at a bunch of people and say I want this from this person and this from this person, I want this, and you want to kind of model so many
Mm,
different things from so many people. I think where that evolution shifts in your 30s and 40s, you're saying this is what I have to offer, this is my value proposition, and how can I evolve from my center versus constantly being pulling from everybody else. That's where I think the difference comes in. You have a different
mm.
level of awareness and self-awareness and confidence to say, okay, there's certain parts of me that I am who I am and I can still evolve this, but I'm not going to all of a sudden be an amalgamation of a bunch of different people all of a sudden.
Yes. Yeah, because I think you do, and it's like trying out there. I was thinking like with this work I'm doing now, it's almost like I'm helping them for those who are much younger than me, fast track the process because
Yes.
otherwise we're spending so much time not being
Mhm.
us, spending
Yes.
so much
You're
time being other
absolutely
copies, and it's just
correct.
like, oh gosh, I'm going to fast track this change for you and really
Yeah.
speed up your like the really minimizing the frustration because there's just
Hmm.
so much of that you're the entire time if you're running after an image of something else, you're just never feeling
Yeah.
fulfilled in any way.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And inhibits so much of what your true authentic growth potential is because you don't necessarily see your self-worth or your value or your strength. You're trying to fit so many different things into a mold or a shell of somebody else or something else.
Yep.
And that ultimately is going to limit your growth potential. But it's also why the
Mm.
The mentality of fake it till you make it, or the poser syndrome, or all of these little, nomenclature nuances of all of this facade. This is where they've come from. They're clearly out there and well known because I think people
Mhm.
authentically, genuinely feel that way, especially early career and early adulthood and all of these things. Hmm.
But it's interesting that because almost like what we talked about earlier, where we started kind of this full circle moment of we wouldn't have the glass, the window wouldn't be as clear if we didn't already try to do all of the copying or the things you're talking about, the poses and
Totally.
that, right? So it is the thing that shaped us and it helped us see what we don't want. And we wouldn't necessarily know what we do want if unless we got a lot of what we didn't.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Right? If we
The
kept looking
pain
in the
you have
mirror
to
and we
go
were
through.
like, "This is me. I'm posing." Okay, well, of course, I never did that. But certain people are like, whatever you
Yeah.
do, like that's your journey." And I think the idea of like, I'm going to own this journey. I'm actually just going to. This is my journey, and I can decide like how much longer I want to go through the iterative process. That is it necessary? We have to start to evaluate that for ourselves.
Yeah.
Is this process necessary, or is it something that we can kind of jump over? And that's what, like, I think like books or like podcasts or different things that we do, it's meant to kind of help fast track learning. But a
Absolutely.
lot of times, and which is good, we need
Yeah.
to have a little help with that, a little help from our friends, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, I do feel like this, like even what I said before, which is I've learned a lot on my own and I've achieved a lot on my own and I've failed a lot on my own. I did realize later on that opening the door and including more people and letting more people help me fast track some of the learning was a good thing. And at the same time, I do believe that that my ability to learn on my own and hiccups and all those things that I made me, like, I call it, more unshakable. It really did
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
I proved to myself that I may have failed, which I did multiple times, right? But I did get up from
Hmm.
it. I did learn. It's like, in my mind, it's like a sin if you don't learn from the things when you fall back. Like if you don't learn and you just keep doing them like 5,000 times,
Yeah.
well, then
Well,
that's not very good.
I think that's part of the dynamic challenge facing our young people and young leaders today is it is a little bit more information overload, right? So
Mhm.
before, if I wanted information from a mentor or leader or whatever, we would pick up a book and I would read that book over weeks or months or whatever it may be and kind of try and see how I could assimilate that experience in. Now I feel like part of the challenge is someone will listen to a podcast every morning and every day on the way to and from, work or as part of working out or what have you. And now you have so much more information that you have to try and process, pick and choose what you're going to bring in life. And I think the challenge that they're going to be faced with is what do I assimilate into my ecosystem and what don't I, right? And how do I really give it
Yes.
time to percolate to say, did this work for me or did this not? And it doesn't matter if it's, anything in terms of self-help. So if you're thinking, diets or fitness or what have you, if it's work, right? Okay, I'm going to take some
Hmm.
classes on project management or organization or whatever it may be. I think the challenge with young people today is them finding the balance of information overload and giving things enough time to percolate within their sphere of influence to say, how can I ensure that I'm pulling this thread all the way through versus trying a bunch of little things and then having nothing come to it at the end or fully come to fruition. I think that's an interesting challenge for people.
Yeah, that is. I think so too. So for those who are listening now who might be at
Yeah.
that interesting kind of, they might just be at a place where they're kind of going like with you, again, think you leapt in, you took different leaps, people were calling you into leadership, you to decide to say yes. What are just a couple of kind of words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom you would leave people with to be thinking about maybe with this next 5 to 10 years
Mhm.
hold and like what they should be trying to really lean into to make the best of what's yet to come.
Yeah, so I always kind of look at two or three different things. One is at least once a year I sit down and actually go through a what I call a gap assessment, right? What is missing in my life? What am I still striving for? Because I do think have the keep up the Joneses mentality, right? If you're a high performing, high successful, high challenging person, there's always this dynamics of what am I expecting? Do my expectations align with reality? What am I missing in life? So you always have to sit down and say, okay, what are, my top 3 to 5 objectives this year? How am I going to accomplish that? And for me, some things were I'd always had this path of financial freedom. I had this mentality that I want to live debt free starting 40 on. And I'm talking no cars, no houses, no nothing, right? That this is, a goal in life and how can I march towards that? So, that was one simple
Mhm.
objective. Another one was to ensure that I am giving back and showing appreciation and modeling that appreciation for my kids, right? serving, volunteering, whatever it may be. And so there's definitely some times in life where I automatically said yes or no based on those two key decision trees, right? Is this going to be a positive influence in life for me or those around me? And is this going to help me or hurt me on that financial trajectory? The third piece was, which always ended up being my ultimate decision maker. If I'm at 99%, my yes or no was, we joke about this, but my 7 hour car test. So the people I'm working for or working with, could I spend 7 hours in a car with them driving somewhere? Could I go on vacation with them? Could I spend Thanksgiving with them? Because I have kind of very much come to the conclusion that we spend so much time in work and career and that dynamic that I want to be surrounded people that I really enjoy, that I trust, that I hope they trust me, and that we build a friendship and a relationship. And it's very interesting because I think growing up in like the late 70s, 80s, you had this mindset of in order to be a leader, you can't be friends with anybody, or in order to be a parent, you can't be friends
Hmm.
with kids. And I feel like, okay, I can't only be a friend, but I do need to be a friend too, right? You have to have that
Mm.
trustworthy relationship. So my ultimate decision maker in any single career path, so when I went from sports into my first corporate move, was because I trusted Deb. I liked her. I
Mm.
could have sat with her for hours and talked about nothing. I trusted her with my
Mm.
career path. And so while it checked boxes one and two, and there were certain things I was going to learn and grow and evolve and all of that, at the end of the day, it ultimately came down to the like 11-yard decision of, or 1 yard decision of, hey, she would be a great influence and positive influence in my life, and I can learn a lot from her, and I enjoy her company. And so each of the iterative decisions ultimately came down to that final piece. It
Mm.
makes a decision if I stay with a company or I think I'm outgrowing a situation and I'm open to, different dynamics is, that dynamics of those relationships have been a critical decision tree throughout everything in my life.
That's a great. I love that. I love the decision tree framework. I love that whole concept of the
Yeah.
7 hour car ride because that makes that would
Yeah.
make a huge difference. It really was. If you can answer no, I always like anytime we can simplify something, right?
Yes.
Whenever we can
Yes.
simplify a decision, because sometimes it's hard to do it. But your gut, I always say, like our values are usually the thing that help us. They're not decorations; they really are our guidepost, and our gut will tell us whether or not this decision is right or not. But we do have to ask the right questions, and so I think that is a great the kind of ending message too, right? Asking yourself the right questions and being consistent on how you ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, and where your priorities ultimately are in life, right? So some people ultimately
Hmm.
say, oh, it's financial or title or career path, but what does that really mean, right?
Hmm.
What does that mean in terms of your true life endeavor? Because if you're making a change, ideally that change isn't for a couple months. That ideally is a change you're making for the next few years in a true career pathing decision.
I love that.
Yeah,
I feel you and I really do believe we could speak for hours and hours. And so
I'm
the odds
sure.
are we'll be
Mhm.
talking again, I'm sure, because it's such good stuff. And I think you really do present as is that person who kind of has their stuff together. I think you're a great example of that. Are we all perfect? Are you perfect? Not like none of us are perfect. That's not the point. The point is that if you're open to learning, you grab a hold of the opportunities as they come your way. You discern by having some of these like, choice matrix type of things that you do, and then you also respect people and know that the people you work with are important. I mean, I think all these things are so critical and foundational to what this future of leadership is going to look like and how we need to embrace it. So I appreciate you being on here. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
spending that time and powwowing with me.
Thank you. Much appreciated. And it's always fun to have someone who has just as much energy and talks just as fast and thinks just as fast because then, I don't have to slow down. So it's great.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so and for those who are listening, if you found like great value in this conversation with Laura, because I know I did, share this far and wide. This is how we continue to help other leaders just kind of, bypass or step over the things that are happening in life, see things differently that are happening right in front of them in a much more positive way. So thanks for everybody for listening. And thanks again, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership of the Heart podcast. Be well.